Hi friends, hope you are doing fine. Today I'm going to talk about the research problem, and this is very important for most students, PhD students, postdocs, even faculty who are writing grant proposals. And one of the things you need to do is essentially write this research problem as a very simple statement. And this process, though the end result may be simply a statement or a paragraph, the amount of time involved here can be quite large, and this is a very important part of the research process, because if you can state the research problem well, then your research is going to be a smooth process. And if your research problem is vague, it is ambiguous, then it's going to be much more difficult for you. So let's look at the basic definition about the research problem. Essentially, you can say this is an explicit statement about the problem which you want to solve. Now, this statement can be in a sentence, it can be in a paragraph. And how do you get the research problem is pretty much a standard process as far as research is concerned. You do a literature survey, you find the research gap, you think about the research gap, and you figure out a particular subset of a problem in the research gap, which will be useful for your thesis, for your grant proposal, or for your postdoc. Now, of course, this process sounds simple when we just say it, but it's actually a very complicated process, because very often you have to go back and forth between the literature survey, finding the research gap, discovering a good problem within the research gap, and so on. Because there may be some problems in the research gap which are very interesting. For example, if you are in fluid mechanics, you may feel there is a research gap, there is no closed form solution of the general Navier-Stokes equation. But this problem may be too difficult for you to do as a PhD student, so you may not want to touch this research problem at this point of your career. Maybe you can do it later in your life. So it's not a very simple process. Different problems are suitable for different type of people. Very simple problems may be suitable for master's degree thesis, somewhat more complicated problem for PhD thesis, and even more complicated problem for postdoctoral research work, and so on. So again, we have to keep in mind as to what is the problem statement which is going to be suitable for you. Now, we can classify research into two basic types, that is theoretical research and experimental research. And sometimes people also classify research into pure and applied research. Now, many a time modern research involves multiple aspects of things. So you may be somebody who has to do some theoretical work, and you may also have to do some work which is experimental. So these are often driven by the problem statement rather than your own choice about the type of problem or type of research you prefer. Now, the important thing is that the research problem statement is going to drive your complete research program. So it's going to drive your PhD proposal, postdoc proposal, it's going to drive the grant proposal which you write, and so on. So even before you embark on the problem of writing a proposal, the research problem statement should be there. Now let us look at some examples of research problem statements, so that will help you figure out some of these things. For example, you could have a problem such as study the impact of climate change on Maldives. So if you do not know, Maldives is essentially a country which is a set of islands, and what happens here is that because of climate change, the sea is coming up and parts of the land are going below water. So again, this is a research problem which you can look at. You can figure out different methods to solve this problem, and so on. One more problem could be that you want to find the different ethnic groups who are affected by colon cancer. So what happens is that many diseases such as cancer impact different ethnic groups, different genders, different races differently. So studies can be done about what is the impact of these diseases on different groups and what is the source of these impact. There could be a research problem such as a relationship between race, religion, and gender on income in the UK. So again, this is a typical problem which you often have. You have a set of variables and you want to see how a certain variable is impacted by this set of variable. Now, in the mathematical type of domain, you could, for example, take on a problem of solving a certain partial differential equation. You may even take up a problem of finding a more efficient solution if a solution is already present. So these are some examples of problem statements. Now do remember that just because you are able to make a problem statement doesn't mean that you can solve it. For example, you can do a lot of literature search and come up with this gap that there are no vehicles which are flying around at the speed of light. So you may want to address this problem statement that you want to develop a flight vehicle which flies at the speed of light. But do remember, the current technology and science infrastructure may not be there to support this problem statement. So whenever you are thinking of a problem statement, a research problem, keep in mind as to what is the current level of technology, the current level of science which is out there. Can your research problem be actually solved or not? Because you can of course come up with problem statements, but in case you are not able to solve them within the time period which is allotted to you, for example in the MS, in the PhD, in the postdoc, or in the grant, then what will happen is that it will become a very frustrating activity. Of course, if you are somebody who is writing science fiction, you can think about research problems or problem statements which are out there, and you can possibly think of science fiction type of scenarios. That's always possible. So we can say the problem statement can exist out there. It doesn't have to depend on the fact that it can actually be solved. So there are of course many problem statements, many research statements, and only a finite subset of these statements are solvable by current technology, by the kind of students you have, by the kind of lab facilities you have, and so on. So one of the things about being a successful researcher or scientist is to pick problem statements which you can actually do within the context of your own lab, your own country, and so on. So now let us look at one more thing, which are certain sources of these kind of problem statements. So I will give you three sources. The number one source is new technologies and methods. So whenever a new technology comes up, such as machine learning, such as nanoscience, and so on, what happens is that there are a lot of old problems which can be solved by these new methods. So again, you can always formulate a problem statement based on that. So there are many industries where machine learning is used. For example, you could use machine learning in face recognition. It can actually help you to spot criminals and so on, and many different problems can be solved using machine learning. You can actually solve healthcare problems using machine learning. For example, you could detect diseases such as cancer by studying the various pictures and so on. Now the next problem set comes out of context, and many a time what happens is that a certain problem has been done in a certain country and it can be repeated in a different country. So a problem may have been done in US, but you could again do this problem in Japan, for example, or in Norway or in China. So all these things are possible. Also, sometimes the context situation may be that a certain group of studies, for example about health, has been done for a certain segment of population. Maybe it has been done for white people but not for black people in US, and so you can propose a study which addresses black people. Similarly, you can think about any situation in context. It could even be within the engineering and science domain. Context is very important as far as problems are concerned. Now the third problem statement idea can come from whenever there are disagreements between scientists and scholars. So this is of course a great set of concepts which you can get. Now wherever you take a subject such as, let us say, political science or economics or social science or even the sciences, different professors do not agree about a particular problem. So there are these schools of thought which are out there. There are schools of thought which are based on, for example, free markets and based on socialistic policies. So you can always try to look at a problem which tries to bridge these parts. Wherever there is a research community where there is a lot of open discussion and there are gaps and there is a disagreement between the different scientists, what happens is there are a lot of research problems which can be created and solved because you want to fill in all these blanks which are out there in the literature, and various studies are possible to address these issues. So this was my take on the problem statement. I hope this video is useful to you, and I will see you in a video sometime soon. See you then.